Open that trailer. Now. The command cracked through the warm Nevada evening like a whip of authority, sharp enough to turn heads across the crowded rest stop. Ava Richardson slowly lifted her eyes from the steaming paper cup resting between her hands. For a moment, she didn't move. The distant rumble of diesel engines rolled across the parking lot as dozens of 18-wheelers sat beneath rows of amber highway lights. The smell of fuel, hot asphalt, and fresh coffee drifted through the desert air. Ava had driven nearly 600 miles that day. Her shoulders ached. Her boots were dusty. The electronic logbook in her truck showed only 42 minutes left before federal regulations required her to stop for the night. She had planned to finish her coffee, call her father, and get some sleep. Instead, 3 police cruisers now surrounded her rig. Blue lights reflected across the chrome mirrors of her truck, painting the entire parking area in flashes of red and blue. Nearby drivers paused beside fuel pumps. A family exiting the convenience store stopped walking. Even the cashier behind the window seemed frozen, watching the scene unfold. Sergeant Travis Cole stepped forward with the confidence of a man who expected obedience before he even spoke. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a neatly pressed uniform, he carried himself like the rest stop belonged to him. His gaze traveled from Ava's face to the trailer attached behind her truck. I said open it. Ava set her coffee down carefully. Not a drop spilled. She stood from the metal picnic bench and brushed a thin layer of desert dust from her jeans. The evening sun had almost disappeared behind the mountains, leaving streaks of orange and purple across the horizon. Is there a problem, officer? She asked calmly. Cole's expression hardened. I'll ask the questions. A few drivers exchanged nervous glances. Ava remained still. Her face revealed nothing. The wind tugged gently at the edges of her dark jacket as a freight train horn echoed somewhere far beyond the interstate. Cole removed a folded sheet of paper from his pocket. We received information that your trailer may be transporting illegal cargo. Murmurs spread among the onlookers. Ava glanced briefly toward her truck. The long white trailer stood silent beneath the lights. Every seal was intact. Every document was current. Every mile of the route had been logged properly. Then I'm sure you'll have the appropriate warrant, she replied. The words were respectful, measured, yet something about them seemed to irritate Cole immediately. His jaw tightened. Behind him, 2 younger officers shifted their weight uneasily. One looked toward the trailer. The other kept staring at Ava as if trying to figure her out. Most people became nervous when surrounded by police. Most people raised their voices or stumbled over their words. Ava did neither. She simply stood there beneath the fading sky, steady as the desert itself. The parking lot seemed quieter now, the air heavier. Cole took another step forward. Funny thing, he said. People with nothing to hide usually cooperate. Ava met his eyes without blinking. The distant neon sign of the truck stop flickered overhead. Somewhere, an engine started. Somewhere else, a truck door slammed shut. Yet around them, the crowd remained locked in silence. Watching, waiting. And although none of them knew it yet, this routine stop was about to become the biggest mistake Sergeant Travis Cole had made in his entire career. Ava Richardson had learned long ago that silence made people reveal more than questions ever could. She stood beside the picnic bench while the evening wind swept across the rest stop, carrying the scent of diesel fuel and desert sage. Sergeant Cole seemed to expect an argument. Instead, he got patience. That bothered him more than resistance. Around them, truckers lingered near their rigs pretending to check straps, fuel gauges, and cargo manifests while quietly watching the scene unfold. Ava understood why. Anyone who spent enough years on American highways learned to recognize tension when it appeared. She had spent nearly 15 years behind the wheel. 15 years crossing state lines, mountain passes, crowded cities, and lonely stretches of interstate where the only company was the hum of tires against pavement. She knew every kind of weather, every kind of customer, every kind of person. Her truck had carried groceries, medical supplies, construction materials, and emergency equipment through 38 states. The job demanded patience more than strength. Long hours, early mornings, sleepless nights. Yet she rarely complained. Back home outside Tulsa, Oklahoma, her father often joked that Ava had inherited her stubbornness from 3 generations of military veterans. The old man still called every Sunday without fail. He always asked the same question. Did you eat today? Ava smiled whenever she thought about it. The memory briefly softened her expression before she glanced toward the truck again. The dark blue Peterbilt sat beneath the lights with thousands of highway miles etched into its chrome surfaces. She kept it spotless. The dashboard was organized. The maintenance records were perfect. Even now, a small framed photograph rested inside the cab. It showed her father standing beside her on the day she bought her first truck. Neither of them had much money then, but they had pride. That had been enough. One of the younger officers looked at her commercial driver identification card again. "You have been driving all alone?" he asked. "For years," Ava answered. "That is a lot of road." "It is." The officer nodded slightly. There was no hostility in his voice, only curiosity. Cole immediately stepped between them. "That is enough." The younger officer fell silent. Ava noticed the exchange. So did several truckers nearby. Authority flowed through the rest stop like electricity. Everyone felt it. Everyone adjusted to it. Cole folded his arms and stared at her. "Funny thing about anonymous tips," he said. "Sometimes they come from people who know exactly what they are talking about." Ava tilted her head slightly. "And sometimes they do not." A faint smile almost appeared at the corner of her mouth before disappearing. Cole noticed. His eyes narrowed. The desert sky continued darkening overhead. The last traces of sunlight faded behind distant mountains. Parking lot lights buzzed softly to life one by one, casting long shadows across rows of parked trailers. Somewhere across the lot, a truck driver started a coffee maker inside his sleeper cab. Another climbed down from his rig carrying a leash as his dog trotted beside him. Normal life continued all around them. Yet the center of the parking lot felt strangely suspended in time. Ava slipped her hands into her jacket pockets. Calm, steady, unbothered. To everyone watching, she looked like a woman who had absolutely nothing to hide. And for reasons Sergeant Cole could not quite explain, that made him even more determined to prove otherwise. Sergeant Travis Cole had built a reputation that traveled faster than his patrol car. Drivers passing through 3 counties knew his name. Local deputies spoke about him with a mixture of respect and caution. Business owners greeted him with handshakes. City officials praised his record during public meetings. On paper, he looked like the kind of officer every community wanted. 20 years in uniform. Countless commendations. Recognition from state agencies. Photographs hanging on walls beside governors, mayors, and police chiefs. Yet reputation and character were not always the same thing. Cole believed experience made him right. He trusted his instincts more than evidence, and his assumptions more than questions. Over time, people had stopped challenging him. Most simply nodded and stepped aside. That was easier. That was safer. Tonight, however, something felt different. He could not explain it. He only knew that the woman standing beside the truck refused to fit the picture he had already created in his mind. He glanced toward the long trailer again. The anonymous tip had arrived less than an hour earlier. No name, no return number. Just a short message claiming a truck matching Ava's description was transporting something suspicious through the region. The information had been vague, incomplete, yet Cole had acted immediately. He told himself it was because public safety mattered. He told himself he was protecting the community. Deep down, another motivation pushed him forward. The previous 6 months had not gone well. A highly publicized smuggling case had collapsed after investigators found problems with evidence handling. Reporters had asked difficult questions. Internal reviews had followed. Nothing serious enough to threaten his position, but enough to damage his confidence. For the first time in years, people had begun doubting him. Cole hated that feeling. He wanted a win. Something visible. Something undeniable. As he stood beneath the parking lot lights, he imagined exactly how tomorrow's headlines might read if the anonymous tip proved true. The thought settled into his mind and refused to leave. Nearby, one of the younger officers approached carefully. "Sergeant, dispatch still has not confirmed additional information." Cole barely looked at him. "They will. Should we wait?" The question hung in the air. Several drivers overheard it. Ava heard it too. Cole slowly turned his head toward the officer. The younger man immediately straightened. "We already have enough reason to continue," Cole replied. His voice remained calm, but the message was clear. The conversation was over. The officer nodded and stepped back. Ava watched the exchange without speaking. The fluorescent lights from the convenience store reflected across the parking lot windows. A refrigerated truck pulled into a distant fuel lane. Air brakes hissed. A receipt printer buzzed somewhere near the diesel pumps. Ordinary sounds filled the night. Yet beneath them all, tension continued growing. Cole checked his watch. Then he looked at Ava again. Her posture had not changed. Her breathing remained steady. No nervous pacing. No angry outbursts. No signs of panic. The more composed she appeared, the more unsettled he became. People usually reacted when confronted. They defended themselves. They explained. They worried. Ava simply waited. Patiently. Almost as if she knew something he did not. And for the first time that evening, a small seed of uncertainty began to take root inside Sergeant Travis Cole's mind. The uncertainty did not last long. Sergeant Cole pushed it aside the same way he had pushed aside doubts for years. Experience, he reminded himself, mattered more than hesitation. He stepped toward the truck and motioned toward the trailer parked beneath the glowing lot lights. "I am giving you another opportunity to cooperate," he said. His tone was controlled, but there was impatience beneath it now. Ava looked at him for a moment before shifting her gaze toward the trailer. The polished metal reflected streaks of white light across its side panels. "I have cooperated," she replied calmly. "I provided my identification, registration, commercial license, shipping documents, and route logs." The surrounding drivers listened carefully. Several nodded among themselves. Everything she said was true. The paperwork had been handed over without delay. The records matched. The cargo manifest matched. The electronic logs matched. Yet none of it seemed to matter anymore. Cole folded the anonymous tip sheet and slipped it back into his pocket. "Then you should not have a problem letting us continue." Ava studied him quietly. The wind lifted a loose strand of hair near her face before carrying it away again. "I believe procedures exist for a reason," she said. "So do I," Cole answered immediately. The irony of the exchange was not lost on the older truckers standing nearby. One driver leaning against a fuel pump lowered his coffee cup. Another crossed his arms and continued watching. Nobody spoke. The night itself seemed to be listening. A dispatcher's voice suddenly crackled through one of the police radios. The words were indistinct from where the crowd stood, but Ava noticed something. One of the younger officers listened carefully. His expression changed. He walked toward Cole and quietly shared the update. Whatever he said lasted only a few seconds. Cole's jaw tightened again. "Noted," he replied curtly. The officer hesitated. "Should we wait for additional verification?" Cole shook his head. No, the answer came too quickly. Ava noticed that too. She glanced briefly toward the interstate beyond the parking lot. Headlights streamed through the darkness like rivers of white light. Thousands of people were moving across America at that very moment. Families, workers, travelers. Most would never know this small confrontation existed. Yet decisions made in moments like these often revealed far more than people intended. Cole took another step closer. Opened the trailer. Ava slipped one hand into her jacket pocket and slowly removed a ring of keys. Several officers immediately focused on them. The nearby truckers exchanged surprised looks. For the first time all evening, it appeared she might comply. The metallic keys reflected the parking lot lights as they rested in her palm. Cole's shoulders relaxed slightly. He thought he had finally won. Ava looked down at the keys. Then she looked back at him. "Before I do that," she said quietly, "I want the record to show that I requested proper documentation and asked whether verification had been completed." The statement sounded oddly specific, almost formal. One of the younger officers frowned. Another shifted uneasily. Cole stared at her. "The record?" Ava gently closed her fingers around the keys. "Yes, the record." For a brief moment, nobody spoke. The air felt heavier than before. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A truck engine idled somewhere across the lot. And although no one could explain why, several people watching suddenly had the same strange feeling. This situation was no longer unfolding the way Sergeant Cole believed it would. The silence that followed seemed to stretch across the entire rest stop. Ava kept the keys in her hand, but made no move toward the trailer. Her expression remained calm, yet there was something different now. Something deliberate. The younger officers sensed it immediately. One glanced toward the patrol vehicles. Another looked back toward the convenience store where several travelers had gathered near the windows, quietly watching. Sergeant Cole appeared determined not to notice. "You are making this more difficult than it needs to be," he said. Ava tilted her head slightly. "Am I?" The question was simple, almost gentle, yet it landed with unexpected weight. Cole took a slow breath. "You have had every opportunity to cooperate. Ava looked toward the trailer again. And you have had every opportunity to verify the information you received. A faint breeze crossed the parking lot. A loose receipt skittered across the pavement before disappearing beneath a parked pickup truck. Somewhere overhead, a commercial jet passed through the dark sky, its blinking lights moving steadily east. Everything felt strangely ordinary and deeply important at the same time. The younger officer who had spoken to dispatch earlier stepped forward again. His radio remained clipped to his shoulder. "Sergeant," he said carefully, "dispatch is recommending we hold until additional units complete confirmation." Cole's patience finally began showing cracks. "I heard dispatch. Sir, they sounded pretty clear." Cole turned toward him. "And I am being clear." The younger officer fell silent. Several truckers exchanged uneasy looks. Nobody needed years of law enforcement experience to understand what was happening anymore. The situation had stopped being about the anonymous tip. It had become personal. Ava watched the exchange without saying a word. She noticed the uncertainty spreading among the officers. She noticed the questions they were beginning to ask themselves. Most importantly, she noticed who was paying attention and who was not. Every detail mattered. Every reaction mattered. Cole extended his hand. "The keys." Ava looked at the keys resting in her palm. The silver metal reflected the parking lot lights like tiny mirrors. Then she handed them over without resistance. The movement surprised everyone. Cole accepted them immediately. Around the lot, several observers straightened. The moment felt decisive. Final. Cole walked toward the rear of the trailer with renewed confidence. The officers followed. Drivers stepped aside to create space. Even the sounds of conversation seemed to fade. Ava remained exactly where she was. She did not follow. She did not object. She simply stood near the picnic table, her hands now resting comfortably inside her jacket pockets. Cole reached the trailer doors. The massive locking mechanism gleamed beneath the lights. He examined the seal. Everything appeared normal. The paperwork said the trailer contained packaged commercial refrigeration equipment bound for a distribution center outside Reno. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Yet he proceeded anyway. One of the younger officers looked back toward Ava. Something about her composure bothered him. Most people became anxious when their livelihood was being questioned. Most people showed frustration, fear, anger. Ava showed none of those things. She looked almost reflective, as though she were watching a story unfold that she had already read before. Cole rested his hand on the locking mechanism and paused. For the first time all evening, the rest stop felt completely still. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the desert wind seemed to hold its breath. And standing beneath the glow of the parking lot lights, Ava quietly glanced at her watch. Not because she was worried, because she was waiting. The seconds passed slowly, almost unnaturally slowly. Sergeant Cole remained near the rear of the trailer, one hand resting against the cold metal door while the parking lot lights cast pale reflections across the polished surface. Yet he did not open it. Something invisible had entered the moment, something difficult to name. The confidence that had driven him all evening no longer felt as solid as it had an hour earlier. Across the lot, engines hummed softly in the darkness. A refrigerated trailer released a steady mechanical drone. Fuel pumps clicked. A highway sign glowed in the distance beyond the rows of trucks. Normal sounds. Ordinary sounds. But together they created a strange silence around the people standing there. Ava remained beside the picnic table. Her hands rested comfortably in her jacket pockets. The desert air had grown cooler. The heat of the day was fading into the Nevada night, leaving behind a gentle breeze that carried traces of dust and sagebrush across the asphalt. She lifted her eyes toward the horizon. Beyond the truck stop lights, beyond the interstate, the mountains appeared as dark silhouettes against a sky filled with stars. For a brief moment, she seemed completely detached from the tension surrounding her. One of the older truck drivers quietly approached the edge of the gathering crowd. He carried a thermos in one hand and wore a faded denim jacket that had probably seen a million highway miles. He looked toward Ava. She nodded politely. Nothing more was exchanged. Yet the simple gesture felt meaningful. Respect recognized respect. Nearby, the younger officer who had questioned the situation earlier stood silently beside his patrol vehicle. He watched Ava. Then he watched Cole. Then he looked toward the dark highway. The uncertainty in his face had become impossible to hide. The dispatcher had already expressed concern. Verification remained incomplete. Questions remained unanswered. Yet somehow the situation had continued moving forward anyway. He did not know why that bothered him so much. He only knew that it did. Ava glanced at her watch again. The movement was subtle, almost casual. A few people noticed. Most did not. The glowing numbers reflected briefly in her eyes before disappearing. Then she lowered her wrist and returned her attention to the night sky. Her breathing remained slow and steady. Inhale, exhale, calm, patient, waiting. The wind rustled through a row of small trees planted near the convenience store. Their leaves shimmered beneath the parking lot lights like silver coins. Somewhere inside the store, a coffee machine beeped. Someone laughed softly. Life continued. Yet beneath the surface, something was shifting. Even Sergeant Cole felt it now. He could not explain why the trailer suddenly seemed less important than it had before. He could not explain why Ava's composure unsettled him more than any accusation ever could. The feeling lingered like a shadow at the edge of his thoughts. For years, he had trusted certainty. Tonight, certainty was slipping away. And standing beneath a sky crowded with stars, while diesel engines hummed across the sleeping desert, Ava Richardson quietly waited for the final pieces to fall into place. The first sign was not a siren. It was not flashing lights. It was not even a voice. It was the sudden vibration of several phones at the same time. One of the younger officers glanced down at his device. His expression changed instantly. Another officer checked his radio. Then another. Across the parking lot, a black SUV rolled quietly into the rest stop and parked near the edge of the fuel lanes. Then a second arrived. Then a third. None used emergency lights. None drew attention to themselves. Yet every law enforcement officer present immediately noticed them. Sergeant Cole frowned. "What is this?" he asked. No one answered. The younger officer stared at his phone again. "Sergeant," he said carefully, "you need to see this." Cole took the device and looked at the screen. The color drained from his face. The message was short. Federal personnel arriving on site. Maintain current positions. Await instructions. Before he could respond, the doors of the lead SUV opened. Several men and women stepped out wearing plain jackets. Calm, professional, unhurried. They crossed the parking lot with the confidence of people who already knew exactly where they were going. Conversations stopped. Truck drivers straightened. Even the sounds of the diesel pumps seemed distant now. The lead agent approached the center of the gathering and surveyed the scene. His eyes moved from the officers to the trailer and finally settled on Ava. For the first time all evening, a smile appeared on someone's face. "Good evening," he said. "Sorry we are a few minutes late." Ava nodded once. "Traffic." The agent laughed softly. "Always." The exchange made no sense to most of the people watching. It made perfect sense to the federal team. Sergeant Cole stared at them. "What exactly is going on?" The lead agent turned toward him. "That is an excellent question." He reached into his jacket and displayed official credentials. Several officers immediately stepped back. The parking lot grew even quieter. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," he said. "Special Operations Division." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The words seemed to hang in the cool desert air. Then the agent looked toward Ava. "Agent Richardson, would you like to finish the briefing?" A collective breath seemed to leave the crowd all at once. Truck drivers exchanged stunned looks. One man nearly dropped his coffee. The younger officers froze. Ava slowly removed her hands from her jacket pockets. The same calm expression remained on her face, but now everyone saw it differently. She reached inside her jacket and produced a leather credential wallet. The gold badge caught the parking lot lights. "Special Agent Ava Richardson," she said quietly. "Undercover assignment concluded." The words landed with the force of a thunderclap. Cole stood motionless. His eyes moved from the badge to the federal agents and back again. Ava continued. The anonymous tip was part of a controlled federal operation. She looked around the lot. The purpose was never the trailer. Silence. Complete silence. "The purpose," she said, her voice steady and clear, "was to observe how authority would be exercised when people believed no one was watching." The desert wind moved softly through the parking lot. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the interstate, a truck horn echoed across the night. And standing beneath the lights, Sergeant Travis Cole finally understood that the entire evening had never been about Ava Richardson at all. No one spoke for several seconds. The revelation seemed to drain all movement from the rest stop. The truck drivers who had gathered near the fuel lanes stared in disbelief. The younger officers looked from Ava to the federal agents and back again, trying to reconcile the woman they had been watching all evening with the badge now reflecting beneath the parking lot lights. Ava calmly closed the credential wallet and slipped it back inside her jacket. She did not look triumphant. She did not look angry. If anything, she looked tired. The lead federal agent stepped forward and opened a secure tablet. "The operation has been active for 18 months, he said. His voice was professional and measured. Multiple locations, multiple jurisdictions, multiple evaluations of procedural conduct. The words landed heavily. Sergeant Cole remained silent. The confidence that had carried him through the evening was gone now, replaced by something far less comfortable. Reflection. Around him, the details of the night suddenly appeared different. The anonymous tip, the incomplete verification, the warnings from dispatch, the questions from his own officers. Each moment now stood before him like a sign he had chosen not to read. One of the younger officers lowered his eyes toward the pavement. Another slowly exhaled. The federal team continued reviewing information. Quiet conversations followed. Documentation was exchanged. Reports were referenced. Nothing dramatic happened. No raised voices. No chaos. Just facts being placed beside facts until a complete picture emerged. Ava watched in silence. She had spent months preparing for operations that demanded patience above all else. Real investigations were rarely about dramatic confrontations. They were about choices. Small choices repeated over time. Choices that revealed character when nobody believed they were being observed. The older truck driver with the thermos stepped closer and shook his head with amazement. "Never saw that coming," he muttered. Ava smiled faintly. Most people did not. He laughed softly and looked toward the federal vehicles. "Guess tonight turned out bigger than a truck stop." "A little bigger," Ava agreed. Nearby, one of the younger officers finally approached her. He seemed nervous. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "for what it is worth, I thought we should have waited." Ava studied him for a moment. Then she nodded. "That matters more than you think." The officer looked relieved. Across the parking lot, the convenience store doors opened and closed as travelers continued their journeys. A family climbed into an SUV. A delivery driver checked directions on his phone. Life moved forward, unaware that an important lesson had just unfolded beneath the desert stars. The lead federal agent eventually finished speaking with the local officers and returned to Ava's side. "You handled that well," he said. Ava glanced toward the highway. Endless streams of headlights flowed through the darkness. "People usually tell you who they are," she replied quietly. "You just have to give them enough time." The agent smiled. "Ready to head out?" Ava looked once more across the rest stop. At the officers. At the truck drivers. At the rows of parked rigs glowing beneath the lights. Then she nodded. The hardest part of the assignment was over. And for several people standing there that night, the truth they had discovered would stay with them long after the rest stop disappeared in their rearview mirrors. An hour later, the rest stop looked almost exactly the same as it had before. The fuel pumps still glowed beneath bright white lights. Trucks remained lined up in neat rows stretching toward the edge of the property. The convenience store continued serving coffee to travelers passing through the Nevada desert. Yet for the people who had witnessed the events of the evening, nothing felt quite the same. Ava climbed the metal steps into her truck and settled into the driver's seat. The familiar scent of leather, coffee, and road dust surrounded her. For months, this cab had been more than transportation. It had been an office, a home, a cover, and a front-row seat to human nature. She rested her hands on the steering wheel for a moment and allowed herself a long, quiet breath. Outside, the federal vehicles were preparing to leave. Officers exchanged final words. Reports would be completed. Reviews would continue. Procedures would follow their course. That part was no longer her responsibility. Her assignment had reached its end. Ava reached toward the dashboard and picked up the small framed photograph beside the instrument panel. Her father smiled back from the picture exactly as he had on the day she bought her first truck. She looked at it for several seconds before setting it back in place. Then she started the engine. The deep diesel rumble filled the cab. Warm vibrations traveled through the floorboards beneath her boots. Across the parking lot, a few truck drivers noticed and lifted a hand in farewell. Ava returned the gesture with a small wave through the windshield. No speeches. No celebration. Just quiet understanding. The older driver with the thermos tipped his cap as she rolled past. Another driver gave a quick nod. Respect traveled differently among people who spent their lives on the road. Sometimes a simple gesture said everything. As the truck eased toward the exit, Ava glanced once more toward the parking lot. Near the edge of the property stood Sergeant Travis Cole. He was alone now. The bright confidence that had defined him earlier was absent. He simply watched the truck depart. Ava held no anger toward him, no satisfaction, no desire for revenge. The lesson had never been about punishment. It had always been about accountability. People revealed themselves through choices. That truth remained the same whether someone wore a uniform, drove a truck, or carried a badge. The truck reached the interstate entrance ramp and merged smoothly into the flow of traffic. Headlights stretched ahead for miles like a river of white light crossing the darkness. The desert sky above was clear and endless. Stars filled every corner of it. Ava adjusted her mirrors and settled into the steady rhythm of the highway. Mile after mile, the rest stop faded behind her until it became nothing more than a distant cluster of lights on the horizon. Then even those disappeared. The road remained. The engine hummed. The night air moved softly beyond the glass. Somewhere ahead, another destination waited. Another sunrise. Another story. Ava drove on beneath the stars, leaving behind a place where assumptions had met truth, where authority had been tested, and where quiet patience had proven stronger than appearances. The highway stretched endlessly into the darkness, and the red glow of her taillights slowly vanished into the American night.